Imagine thousands of people watching a public execution. The blade falls, the king's head rolls, and then the impossible happens. The body of a decapitated king begins to move. The crowd screams, and all of England is in shock. This is the true story of the execution of Charles I, the monarch who walked even after death. The year 1649 marked the definitive collapse of the relationship between the crown and parliament. England was exhausted by civil wars, abusive taxes, and autocratic decisions. Charles I ruled with the firm conviction that he was chosen by God, and that no mortal man could challenge his authority. On the other side, parliamentarians like Oliver Cromwell could no longer accept living under the weight of a king who refused to negotiate. The country was divided between loyalty and revolt, and the monarch's trial became inevitable. The civil wars had left deep wounds across the nation. Families were divided, cities destroyed, fields abandoned. English blood had stained the English soil, and someone had to pay for it. For many, that someone could only be the king. Accused of treason against his own people, Charles I faced a humiliation he never imagined. For him, being judged by mere subjects was unthinkable, a direct violation of divine order. But for his enemies, his reign had become synonymous with tyranny and destruction. The trial was not merely about punishing a king. It sought to prove that no power is above the law. And, by condemning him, Parliament would forever change the course of British history. Absolute monarchy was being irreversibly challenged. The trial took place in an atmosphere of fear and tension. The king refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of the court, but that no longer mattered. His sentence had been written even before his defense. When the verdict of death by decapitation was announced, the silence that filled the hall seemed to swallow the air. Europe watched in horror, unable to believe that England would dare to kill its own monarch. Ambassadors sent desperate letters. Foreign kings pleaded for mercy, but nothing would change the fate that awaited Charles I on the morning of January 30th. London awoke to an almost symbolic chill. Charles walked to the scaffold with what dignity remained to him. He wore two shirts so that the shivering from the cold would not be interpreted as fear. The crowd watched, torn between hatred, reverence, and morbid curiosity. Each step the king took sounded like a prelude to something greater than a simple execution. There was something solemn and terrifying about that moment. As he climbed the steps of the scaffold, Charles I seemed to see beyond the crowd, as if the life he was leaving behind was small compared to the historical weight of that moment. His last words were measured, careful, directed to the few who could hear him. He knelt, placed his neck on the wooden block, and waited. The executioner, hidden beneath the mask, raised the axe with precision. For a few seconds, the entire city seemed to hold its breath. Time seemed suspended between two worlds. The blow echoed like thunder. The blade cut through flesh and bone in a single impact, and blood splattered across the stage. But before the crowd could process what had happened, the impossible began. The body, headless, moved. The arms trembled. The torso seemed to lean forward. Those nearby swore they saw the king try to stand. The legs seemed to reach for support, as if the body still didn't know it was dead. The public panicked. Some believed it was a divine sign. Others, that it was a curse upon England. Soldiers present claimed to have seen the body take 2 steps before collapsing. For a deeply religious and superstitious society, this was not merely a physiological phenomenon, it was a warning. God was displeased. The natural order had been violated, and England would pay the price. Today we know that muscle spasms can occur after decapitation, but none of that calmed the shock of the population at the time. For many, Charles I had not accepted death. His soul seemed to struggle to remain. Rumors spread like wildfire. The king walked headless. The king tried to get up. The king did not rest. Witnesses contradicted each other, exaggerated, created increasingly fantastic versions. But they all agreed on one point. Something was wrong. The executioner raised the monarch's head, declaring, "Behold the head of a traitor." But his words vanished into chaos. Screams, fainting spells, desperate prayers. The air seemed heavy with something dark, as if the execution had opened a door that should not be touched. The king's body was rushed inside the palace. Even there, doctors reported persistent spasms in his limbs. scientists accustomed to dealing with death were uneasy. The body seemed to fight against the inevitability of death, as if it had too much energy to simply disappear. The head was sewn back onto the body for the wake, following the tradition of the nobility. Those who saw the king's face swore that his expression was rigid, marked by indignation as if he were still protesting against the world that had executed him. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with guilt and uncertainty. England, however, did not find peace. Cromwell seized power, promising to liberate the country from absolutism, but his leadership became as harsh as the reign he had overthrown. The country exchanged a king for a military dictator, and many began to wonder if the death of Charles I had truly been the solution, or the beginning of an even greater problem. Over time, the execution became legendary. The stories about the moving body gained details, versions, exaggerations, and fears. Historians tried to rationalize it, but nothing could erase the feeling that that moment had been too abnormal to be explained by science alone. When the monarchy was finally restored, the king's son, Charles II, spared no one. Those responsible for his father's death were pursued, tried, and punished. Even those who had already died. Cromwell's body was exhumed, symbolically hanged, and decapitated. His head remained on display for decades, and here comes another grim detail. Many claim that Cromwell's desiccated head moved while on display, probably the wind. But the people of the time believed something else, that the curse of Charles I was still alive. The head of the man who condemned him seemed too restless to be at peace. Even today, visitors to the area where the king was executed report strange sensations. Footsteps, sudden chills, distant voices. The square seems to hold its own memory, as if the past insists on walking alongside the present. And so, the question remains: did the king merely exhibit post-mortem spasms, or did he actually attempt to walk after decapitation? A simple biological phenomenon, or a final act of resistance? Perhaps. We will never know. What we do know is that the execution of Charles I did not end a story, it began a legend that has spanned centuries.